Good evening. Allow me to take you on a little vacation. Destination, Portugal, where in 2001 the country made a change to the way they handled the issue of drugs. Noticing the ever-climbing death and HIV rates due to the drug use in Portugal, the government decided to decriminalize most hard drugs that are usually illegal in other countries. A short 5 years later, the country already began to see the benefits. Studies from the Cattell Institute report that deaths in the streets due to drug overdoses decreased from 400 to 290, and the HIV rates plummeted from 1,400 to a low 400. My claim today is that the legalization of all drugs would positively affect the United States. I will support this claim in 3 ways. My first supporting claim is that the legalization of all drugs would create more room in prisons and allow the cops to focus more on major crime offenders such as rapists, murderers, and robbers. Today, the United States suffers from a huge problem, overcrowding of prisons. Since the year of 1978, the amount of prisoners has increased about 76%, allowing the jail populations to reach up to 2 million inmates. According to the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice, in the year 2000, Americans spent approximately $40 billion on prisons, with more than half of that funding going towards incarcerating nonviolent offenders. About 1/3 of the prisoners in American jails are held for drug charges or for crimes related to drug abuse. The Human Rights Watch states drug control policies bear primary responsibility for the quadrupling of the national prison population since 1980 and a soaring incarceration rate, the highest among Western democracies. If the United States were to legalize all drugs, the number of prisoners would decrease drastically. The legalization of drugs would also lessen the instances of crimes such as theft and assault that are directly related to the underground drug markets, which brings me to my second supporting claim. The legalization of all drugs in the United States would make drug use safe for both users and non-users. Like any time period involving prohibition, there is always a lot of violence that accompanies it. If we take a look back to 1920, when the prohibition of alcohol was made into an amendment, we can see that the crime rate, consisting mainly of violence, skyrocketed. So it makes sense that when the amendment was repealed in 1933, the violence occurring in the United States decreased. With the illegalization of drugs, we are seeing the same violence issues today. I'm sure you all know the tragic stories that are occurring, or that involve Mexico and the drug cartel, and all the numerous innocent deaths that people have suffered. Studies conducted by the Congressional Research Service states that between January and September 2009, there were close to 6,000 drug-related deaths occurring primarily along the border. With the legalization of drugs in the United States, our country stands a chance to become allies with Mexico instead of bitter enemies. Now, I understand that drugs, legal or illegal, are hazardous to your health if abused. They can be extremely addicting, cancer-causing, and even life-threatening. But these factors haven't stopped the United States from making something legal before, so why should it matter now? The Journal of American Medical Association claims that the leading cause for death in the United States in the year 2000 was tobacco, responsible for roughly 435,000 deaths, followed by alcohol with nearly 85,000 deaths. The same report states that only 17,000 deaths are caused by the illicit use of drugs. If the United States legalized all drugs, the government would be able to regulate the drug, ensuring clean needles so the risk of HIV is less likely, a safe place to use, and minimize the violence and petty crimes that accompany prohibition and illegal drugs, creating a safer environment for everyone. My third and final point is the legalization of drugs would stabilize and stimulate the economy. As of 2010, the Office of National Drug Control Policy states that the federal government spends about $500 per second on the war on drugs, meaning that in the year 2010, over $15 billion was spent in order to keep drugs illegal. Keep in mind that these figures are including what the state and local governments have spent last year, which Jeffrey A. Moran, author of The Budgetary Impact of Drug Prohibition, says to be around another $25 billion. That means if all drugs were legalized, the United States would have an additional $40 billion in its pocket. This additional money could go towards education, welfare programs, rehabilitation programs, and any other program that seeks financial attention in the United States. Along with the $40 billion that the United States would be saving by legalizing drugs, it is estimated that the country can generate at least another $46 billion annually if all drugs were taxed like that of tobacco and alcohol, says Jeffrey A. Moran and Katie Waldock. Within the first year of legalization of all drugs, the United States and the country would be able to yield close to a $90 billion profit. In conclusion, The legalization of drugs in the United States would have a positive effect for the country. Legalizing all drugs in the United States would be a big step towards bringing America out of debt, helping to stimulate and stabilize the economy. And not only will the legalization of drugs allow there to be more room in jails and allow police to focus more on their heavier crimes, but it would also create a safer environment for both users and non-users. Thank
All right, the proposition's clearly stated. You don't really do a preview. You start to, but it basically goes right into the first point. The secondary claims are clearly labeled as you get to each of them, and they're stated as declarative sentences. So your argument's fairly clear throughout the body of the speech. A preview would be a little bit more helpful. At the end of the speech, though, I thought you had a very nice summary of the position that you were taking, so that helps rescue the structure a little bit, so casual listeners will be able to pick up and follow all the arguments that you're presenting reasonably well. I thought you did a nice job explaining some of the concepts. I think you get a little bit sidetracked in making some of the comparisons to the other substances that have potential negative effects. You're almost on the brink of making a value argument at that particular point, so be careful about straying off into those tangents. The argument ought to be about what the negative consequences are, and in essence you're trying to minimize the consequences. The negative consequences of drug use currently are 17,000 people dead. And it would, if you're going to make an argument that it's going to be less after legalization, then that would be the way to develop that argument, as opposed to just comparing it to tobacco or alcohol or some of those other things. I think that on your presentation, your voice is pretty effective, but you have very infrequent eye contact, and even though you sound very firm and confident when you're speaking, I think that undermines your ethos a little bit. All right, thank you.